Very warm welcome today for this huge event, the launch of the Principles for Responsible Banking. It's a great pleasure and honor to moderate today's panel, the CEO panel discussion on the future of the banking industry, which will last for 55 Swiss minutes. First of all, big congratulations to all the CEOs and the banks here in the room who have signed the Principles for Responsible Banking, a real milestone for sure. So, without further delay, because we have a huge lineup of panelists, 11 to be precise, I would now like to introduce and welcome on stage. First of all, Mr. Kees van Dijkhuizen, CEO of ABN AMRO. Please take the first seat here on the right of the stage. Keith Maastricht, CEO of Amalgamated. Welcome on stage. Carsten Dijkwaard, Chairman of Danske Bank. Guy Cormier, CEO of Desjardins. Norihiko Kato, CEO of Colombe Bank. Arif Khan, CEO of IDLC. Konehali Manana Gugushe, Acting CEO, Land and Agricultural Bank of South Africa. Dimitri Gusev, CEO of Sovcom Bank. Sola David Borja, CEO Africa Regions at Standard Bank Group. Peter Blom, CEO of Triodos Bank. And last but certainly not least, Ademola Adebise, CEO of Wema Bank. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like we have one chair missing, but I will be standing in that case. Please take a seat over here. All right, I would love to kick off this panel discussion with one opening question to each of you. So one after the other. Let me start with you right here. Why, in one sentence, this is the challenge to all of you, in one sentence, why did you sign up for the Principles for Responsible Banking? The mics are on the table in front of you.
Thank you very much, Martina. We signed up for the Principles because we believe that there are opportunities for us to improve our business and also to give back to the society. And technology will form a major enabler for this.
One sentence, please. Next up. What a challenge today.
2 years ago, ABN AMRO started with a new strategy where sustainability is actually at the heart, banking for better for generations to come. And so this is very well aligned with that.
Keith?
Because it's time. Banking influences every other industry in the global financial network and the manufacturing network, and we can have as much influence as any other industry.
Listening to Simon Dettling, I think it's quite obvious why we should sign up on the Principles of Responsible Banking. And we are committed to be part of society, be part of the solutions to the challenges of society. Thank you.
Because of shared prosperity. After 30 years of capitalism, we have seen collateral damage, so we need more than ever shared prosperity.
Small but important systemic bank of Mongolia, heavily dependent on mining industry. We wanted to do anything good for a sustainable future.
To develop and maintain a sustainable business for doing good for our stakeholders in the society and the world.
And for us as the Land Bank, we are an agricultural bank, and therefore climate and climate change is integrally part of our business, and therefore it's very important for us to participate in this.
Well, we have been following the principles for some time, so we just now want to take a public commitment.
Standard Bank signed up for the principles because it aligns with our purpose of driving Africa's growth, and it aligns with our values of doing the right business in the right way.
Peter Blom, Triodos Bank, completely in line for the reason we were founded in 1980, and it was about time.
All very valid and valuable reasons, of course. Keith from ABN AMRO, let me start with you. The big question obviously is why? Why do we need the PRB?
Well, I think as explained already by the keynote speakers, it's very important that there is a commitment, a joint commitment, so joining forces is important, I think, but also that there is structure in the whole system and accountability. And I think this is very important because we don't want, as was mentioned also by keynote speaker, too much of sushi washing. So this is very important.
Keith, obviously, you know, investors and clients are pushing for more responsibility, isn't it? We have at the same time digital disruption, digital transformation, and so on. So a lot is happening at the same time. You have some 3 decades of experience in the banking industry. Why did the banking industry take such a long time to gather behind these principles?
That's a great question. Our bank was founded 95 years ago with the sole purpose of advancing socially responsible issues. So I don't really care why. I'm just glad that we've done it because I think that these principles are so sound, and maybe the most important one really is that target setting and holding each other accountable. And I think if we can do that, let's look to the future. Let's not look to the past. Let's figure out how we make a difference from today. Let's figure out how we actually take stock of where we are, make this planet a little bit better place, whether it's on climate, whether it's on inclusion, whether it's on social other kinds of socially responsible goals, and look to the future and really put these principles into action.
Carson, if I play devil's advocate, why should we actually need such principles? Is it not enough just to follow rules and regulations?
Well, I think that, of course, we should follow the laws and the regulation. But, I mean, seeing what has happened in the last 3-4 decades, I don't think it's enough. It will not guarantee that we will be part of society, part of the solutions to the challenges of society. And therefore, I think that we will have to get away from, and I'm a little rude now, but taking into account what has really influenced us for many years, the sentence from Milton Friedman, the business of business is business, and that you should not take on social responsibilities except increasing profits. I think that's a very clear statement, actually, for saying that that is not enough to actually be part of society and also to deliver on the solutions needed in society.
Guy, Desjardins Group is one of the oldest and largest credit cooperatives in Canada. It was established in Quebec in 1900 and is nowadays one of North America's largest credit unions. Quite impressive, but how will the principles change the way such an old traditional financial institution actually does business?
Well, the principle for us, if we're in business for more than a century, it's mainly because we have been able to adapt over the time to our members' and clients' needs. And right now, the message they sent us is the fact that climate change and environment are so important. Actually, it's been more than 20 years that we've been really proactive by launching new products, insurance product. But the principles are important right now for one reason that is so important. Right now, our economy is too much focused on short-term gains. Trade wars, climate change, a lot of behaviors are there because we want short-term gains. And I think the principles will help us at Desjardins, but also as a co-op. We don't have this quarterly pressure of results and incomes, and We make money, a lot of money, it's okay. But at the end of the day, having a long-term perspective of our growth and our impact in the economy, I think it's one of the biggest reasons why we decided to sign the principles.
Norihiko, a lot of banks have not yet signed up to the principles. What is your message to them? Why should maybe even some banks here present in the room that's still there to show up sign up for the principles?
I know several very big familiar name banks still hasn't joined this initiative yet. But you know, in the banking sector, nobody believes in what Donald Trump is saying. And the same as customers. Big bank may be concerned about the long-term relationship with a certain sector's customers. But those industries people are also thinking about the environment. And joining and taking and complying with these principles, that really make our discussions and our more easier to persuade those stakeholders and the customers. I really want to recommend any banks to join this principle and initiative.
Arif, it's really amazing and surprising that so many banks from emerging and frontier markets have signed up for the principles. What's in there for a bank like yours that is from Bangladesh?
Yeah, I'm coming from a different background. Bangladesh is a small South Asian country, small in terms of GDP, $350 billion. But I think it's big in terms of our population size, 180 million. In terms of GDP growth rate for the last 10 years, it's growing more than 7%. And I would say that Bangladesh has also shown a big step by giving shelter to almost 1 million Rohingya refugees last 2 years. So in that context, Bangladesh is also in a very difficult position where global warming and climate change actually having serious impact on our country. So what we think that our company, IDLC Finance, we do small financing and housing finance, and we think that if we sign this kind of agreement, the principles, what we see in the document, that will help our society to be more responsible, and we want to be part of a responsible banking community in our country and help our country to grow with the people. Just one thing that in Bangladesh, in just 4.5 decades, the country's poverty rate in 1971 was 53%. Now it has come down to 21%. Although it's a Muslim moderate country, around 4 million women are working in the garment industry, which is the second largest manufacturer after China in the world. So it's a small country with GDP per capita, but it's progressing a lot, and we want to be a responsible banker. And that's why we think that, like us, many other banks in Bangladesh should sign this agreement.
Small but fine, and the GDP growth rate higher than China at the moment, 7%. Konehali, so the Land and Agricultural Development Bank of South Africa is one of the founding banks of the principles, but it's the only development finance institution in the group so far. What is your message to other DFIs? Why should they sign up? What's in there for them?
Well, I must say that it is surprising that we are the only development finance institution.
Why do you think is that?
Particularly because I think, development finance institutions are typically owned by governments, and governments have a responsibility towards not only the SDGs, but also just contributing towards a more sustainable future. So development finance institutions are one of the vehicles that governments achieve their objectives. And so for me, I think maybe it indicates a little bit of a misalignment between governments and the DFIs that they control. And maybe this is an angle that can be explored. But from a South African point of view, I think it was important for us to firstly make a public statement that the commitment that we have to responsible and sustainable development of a future. I mean, the Land Bank is 107 years old, and as an organization that has helped to establish an agricultural sector in South Africa, we are integrally not only promoted and helped, but we are reliant on predictable climate development. So for us, it is important that we help our clients and therefore help our country to just promote and contribute towards a more sustainable future. But I think it's a challenge for more DFIs and more governments to actually sign up to this.
Talking about clients, Dimitri, Sovcombank is a traditionally a bank that has been a niche player in Russia, basically giving out consumer loans to the elderly. Now today, it's one of the largest privately owned banks in the country. So what will change for the clients, for your customers with the principles?
Yes, well, as I've told, we've been following the principles for some time, so I don't think we really need to change a lot in the way we do business, but what's important is that by formally signing up to the principles, we are taking public commitment to enforce the objectives, and the principles provide for a strong implementation framework with clear accountabilities. So shareholders, executives, employees will have to pursue ambitious targets. As you've mentioned, we've started as a niche player in consumer finance, so I tell you, we know how this area of banking can be irresponsible. And we've quickly realized that, well, sustainable future cannot be built on quick wins and huge margin at any cost. So the customers, I mean, to be successful today, the business need to ensure that the customers agree with your values and they welcome the impact you have on society. So what we are trying to do, we've tried to develop the products which would protect the customers from inappropriate interest costs, and we actually are coming out to the market with products which would enable the customers to almost avoid interest on day-to-day casual spending and to save interest for important consumption such as housing, car loans, etc. Now, as to corporates, we are financing few projects, and we have a pipeline in energy saving, renewable energy, waste management. So ultimately, I guess that the clients will see that we are upholding to the principles, and they will, I hope, value the positive impact we can have.
Do you feel more pressure coming from your clients, your customers, or from shareholders? Because you have big shareholders from China and also from the Gulf Arab region.
Well, I'll answer that this way. Well, I think that very soon it will not be the choice of banks to join or not. They will encounter extreme pressure from society, customers, clients, and most importantly, of their employees. The employees will want us changing. They will want us upholding to the principles rather than just chasing profits. So it's not really a matter of choice. Those who do not comply will lose to the competition.
Sola, Standard Bank Group operates in some 20 countries in Africa. How are you planning to contribute to society now? A very interesting sentence I heard the other day from Riz Khan, a former BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera presenter, was saying that it's not about giving back to society, but giving forward. So how are you planning to give forward with the principles?
We've identified up to 7 impact areas, and that includes financial inclusion, making sure that we get as many people from the informal sector into the formal sector. We're also focused on African trade and investment because you have a lot of small and medium enterprises that are involved in trade. We are focused on infrastructure. The African Development Bank says that Africa needs about $130 billion per annum in funding of infrastructure. So that's an important area for us. Also health, education, and enterprise development, as well as jobs and skills development. And obviously last, but certainly by no means the least, climate change as well as environmental sustainability. For instance, Standard Bank is partnering with the UN Women Initiative, providing funding to women in agriculture to promote climate-smart agriculture that will help to increase productivity and also provide the women with access to markets. And this is in South Africa, in Uganda, in Malawi, and Nigeria. So these are the kind of things that we believe will certainly help to make us more aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Peter, what about you? I mean, Triodos Bank was set up some 40 years ago, and it has been your mission and vision for a long time to make money work for society, the environment, and culture as well. So how are you planning to give back forward to society with the principles?
Well, first of all, this is for us really something to celebrate. If you have been working for so long on this theme and you see that your colleagues more and more sharing this vision, that's great, and also give an extra dynamic to it. When we started, we were seen as an NGO, not a bank, and most of the bankers said 3-4 years and then they're gone. Then we became an interesting niche player, and I think in the last year since the financial crisis, it's really seen as a front runner, and we get many more front runners, including the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, who really push this whole agenda forward. And it's mainstreaming now. And mainstreaming is important because if it doesn't mainstream, we have not the impact that is needed. It's really an urgent question, the whole climate, so we need it. And for us, it's very interesting to continue to play a role in this whole movement. Our customers who come at AGM, 700,000, they feel part of a movement. They sometimes are beyond being a customer. And they want us to play this role even more actively now. Everybody starts to see something must happen. So I really look forward to the coming years and see that we not only sign up for things, but we start to deliver as well. And that's the main task, and we will help cooperate whatever is needed to move this agenda.
That's quite a leap forward from NGO to a niche market player to a bank that is basically a front runner. But looking at the principles, which are some of the gaps that you think, having 4 decades of experience, that need to be filled?
Well, I think one of the traps there are that we not involve people in our change, that we just set the agenda as the CEOs, as the banks, and just come with that. And what I see in the younger generation, they say it's all great what you do, what you think, but we want to be part of it. We want to co-create with you what the new paradigm in finance is. And that's new and that's interesting. And we should not forget to involve them, not only to sort of check with our stakeholders, but bring them in and let them to become bankers with us, so to speak. We are all bankers in a certain sense, so make that real. That is, I think, what is the real challenge.
Especially in an age of digital disruption and robots and AI, and also include the young startup entrepreneurs, isn't it? Ademola, so obviously investment is needed as well to transform banks like yours, for example, as well. Of course, it is very difficult to estimate what kind of costs are involved, but basically to align your business now to the principles, what kind of size of investment do you think will be needed?
Well, it's quite difficult to put a figure, but if I would refer to the SDG office of the president in Nigeria, estimated that 83 billion is required annually by Nigeria for the next 11 years to
83 billion US dollars in Nigeria alone. Wow.
So it's huge, and I think it's the responsibility of both the public and private sector to come together to be able to fund this. But it's not about funding. I think the key issue really right now, it's about creating the awareness, putting the right governance framework in place around the 6 principles, to ensure that we can achieve it.
Keith, ABN AMRO in August signed a deal with the Dutch firm EcoChain to use financial data and sustainability to basically help some of your business clients going green. Are you looking for more such partnerships and maybe also acquisitions?
I think it's very important indeed to do deals like that with partners outside the financial sector who are very smart in the AI and the likes, because we as bankers know very well how to deal with financials, but we do not know how to deal with non-financials. So that's the reason why we ask for help outside. and our clients want to know their footprint. So be it people who invest at this moment money, we give them a green offering as first offering, so as default. With mortgages, we talk about how can you make your house more sustainable. But we also, in energy, for instance, and that was also mentioned by the keynote speaker, we engage with also energy. We have 7 billion to make it more renewable as part of the energy. So 7% last year, 15 today, 20 next year. So concrete targets. But you need companies outside banking to help you with gathering all that information, because banks are not very well equipped for that.
Does the panel here agree that we need to outsource basically some of these tasks to other niche market players?
I would partner.
Or partner? Guy, what do you think about that?
Outsource?
Take a microphone, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to see what kind of proactivity we should have in the future. And I agree with what you said. I think around the globe we should be more proactive on that side, totally.
Keith, next to Keith, Amalgamated Bank holds about $5 billion US dollars in commercial assets and some 45 billion in trust and investment management business in terms of assets under management. Now, growth and credit quality has not always been easy. How do you think that the principles can help spur further growth?
I think that's right. Like Peter, we have a niche business as well, which is often serving the nonprofit community. And a big piece of what we do is help financially empower so many other NGOs and so many other nonprofit organizations here in the U.S. do what they do. We talk a lot about helping those who do good do better. And by taking some of the financial friction out of their marketplace, it expands their ability to deliver on meeting human needs or representing workers or fighting for environmental justice. And that's a very important piece of what we do, and finance can really power that. I do think one of the things that we have to be careful about as the banking industry is that green is just one part of responsible banking. And I think it's easy to default to that being the perspective that often gets looked at because it's a little of the flavor of the day. It is climate week and some other things. But let's remember some of the things that we do really well. There's a huge housing crisis in this country and a lot of other crises, and a lot of other countries. And banking has always been an important part of being able to think about how do we put roofs over people's heads? How do we actually contribute to building, constructing, renovating, providing people the access to affordable housing? There's a lot of things that banks do historically that we do really well. And revisiting the ability to do that in a more responsible way and meeting a number of social goals beyond green. And I don't want to de-emphasize green. Your outfit is a beautiful representation.
That's why I'm wearing this outfit today. Just to the occasion.
But the principles are much, much broader than that. And what Standard Bank, I think, is doing to try and find all of these impact areas, I think, is an important piece. There's lots of ways you can be a responsible bank.
Now, Danske Bank is Denmark's biggest bank, right? But as we just heard from Keith, there are a lot of challenges as well when it comes to implementing those principles, even for a big bank like yours, maybe even bigger, the challenge for you. What's like the number one hurdle for you to implement the principles now?
Well, I think going green a little bit again, Keith, we have got a new government in Denmark, and they have announced a goal that we have to reduce CO2 emissions by 70%, 70, in 10 years from now. That means in 2030. Did I hear anything? No, but it will be a very big job to do that. The opposition has signed up to it, most of the opposition. The Danish industry has done it. And we will, I think, as the absolute biggest bank in Denmark, have a very big job to do also in trying to get to that, to realize that. So we will be working intensively from tomorrow and every single day to make new products, to see what we can do, because if we have to succeed, we will have to implement a lot of new things within the first year and the second year, otherwise it will be impossible to reach a 70% reduction of CO2 emissions by 2030. So we will try to do what we also did in Copenhagen up to COP15. You can perhaps remember, some of you, that there was a lot of discussion about the Kyoto Protocol, that we should have legally binding agreements in the world relating to the climate question. And for example, also goes for the principles for responsible banking. But I think we found a better way, at least we tried in Copenhagen, to set up a completely new strategy where we are actually setting our own targets as nations. And it also goes for the banks that we set our own targets and we are monitored afterwards on if we achieve what we have set. And we are now trying to go forward also in Denmark. And we want to be wealthy still. And Danske Bank wants to be profitable. And we want to be competitive as society. So it is a combination of all those things that will try to make a transition, a complete transformation of our economy. And of course that will require all the skills that we have also in the banking industry in Denmark, and especially in Danske Bank. And we'll do whatever we can to try to help fulfilling this goal. Thank you.
The 70% reduction, obviously that means, first of all, a shift in products, right? New investments, diversification of portfolio and asset allocation and so on. Do you think that in the long term the bank can be more profitable given that you're reshifting and refocusing your strategy?
Now, I must not sound too confident. I think that that is the direction the whole world is moving. That will be the future markets. So I also have a belief that it will be commercially the right thing to do. Listening to the young people, as you said also, then we know where we have to go.
Please, yes.
Well, I think it's interesting that you asked a question about profit. I think we really have to review profits. What are real profits, or what are real things we were taking from other people?
How would you
And
define profit now in this age?
I think what we get more clarity now around it, and there is a lot of discussion about capitalism and how it should be looked at again. Does it really function the way it should function? I think there's a very healthy signal. We don't do away with it. There are some very good things in it, but we really have to address that in a different way. And particularly the banks have learned, I think, that big profits maybe is not the way forward. That should be decent profits. And that fits in the whole long-term holistic approach, what we're trying to do here. So I feel also profits we should think about again. What is a real long-term decent profit? And most of my colleagues agree with it. Maybe to the shareholders, difficult message for the time being, but also shareholders will look more and more into that direction. So I think that's the fascinating moment we are in. Quite a lot of things are changing in that sense.
Redefining the profit meaning, for sure. There is a very interesting report and survey in Switzerland, actually, on that topic by students at the University of St. Gallen, which says that the young people there, they don't put the salary when they enter the workforce first, but it's making an impact. So, Guy, for you, what does that mean now? How do you plan to make an impact with the principles?
I think the number one impact we want to make as is the same kind of impact that our founder Alphonse Jardin tried or did a century ago, is to build a more or kind of a consolidation of a cooperative movement, more joint action, trying to fight the kind of issues that we have to face around the globe right now. And I totally agree with what you said, that the principles are not only something regarding environment, but are something that are important for more broader challenges and issues that we have to face around the globe right now. Yes, there are climate change, but there is also cybersecurity, more inclusiveness, income inequality. Many, many challenges that are really important that we have to face. And I think there's no single person right now, there is no single country around the globe that have enough resources, enough technology, enough people, enough knowledge, enough skills to let's say, face these challenges. And I think that's why the principles are so important, because it brings us to work more together, to learn from each other, to share some of our good practices. And after that, we'll be more able to challenge these issues that we have to face. And I think the number one output from my perspective in Quebec, in Canada, is to try to build a more cooperative joint action with some of the stakeholders that we're working with.
That all sounds very beautiful and promising, but given that we have so many political disagreements and conflicts and geopolitical tensions and US-China trade war and so on, can the banking industry make that work and basically have a cooperative movement?
I'm totally convinced that the answer is yes, because banks will stay, governments will change. That's it. But at the end of the day, there's election in many countries, and each 4 years, 5 years, you'll see sometimes new people, even in this country, new people will come, sometimes with different mindset about how we should follow some of the agreement that we sign around the globe. But financial institutions are systemic most of the time in our countries, are the nervous system of our countries. So, and we will be there in 10 years, in a century, in 200 years, there'll be a financial system. So that's why we are resilient, and that's why if we are really focused and keen on this issue, we have a lot of opportunities in front of us.
Maybe just a couple of consolidations and maybe a couple of new players in the market, right?
But we don't have a choice. I mean, we have existential crises of climate, income inequality, and fundamental attacks on the democratic norms that have governed our world for so long. If banks don't help be part of the solution, we won't have any customers. We won't have any business to do it. And the stakes are so dire that we've got to act and do these kinds of things.
Let's move over to Mongolia for a second, Norihiko. Now, you're one of the largest privately owned banks there, set up in '95. You make up some 20% of the banking sector in Mongolia, right? How do things look there? How much are you planning to change, and how much support are you getting from the people?
Yes, the size of my bank, Goromoto Bank, just 2.5 billion US dollar total assets. It's tiny on a global basis. But in Mongolia, with 3 million population, we capture the 20% of the market. I signed these principles, but I myself are a bit concerned, not to be called out we are just greenwashing, what we can do. First of all, this quickly developing our country, we have many issues. The poverty ratio is still just slightly below 20%. And the corruptions and those things are always involved in making our business a bit difficult. And women inclusive, those are the issues. So I think our bank should try, in a broader sense of sustainability, to help the poor. I mean, the SME, women, those are the things we can do. And also, we do also corporate banking. And mining sector is one of the important customer. And I don't think it's realistic to shut down them. This is the important industry for the development of the country. But we have the good relationship of those mining customers, and should be able to talk to. They need to make some transitions. So the so-called transitional financing is one topic that we might be able to work together with, maybe with help of international financial institutions and those things. Also, the Mongolian government not just rely on, try to diversify the economy. Also, they make some target to increase the renewable energy to 20% in the future. As the size of the bank is limited, but we do our best to anything we can do in line with the government's target and try to make our country suffering from this bad air in the winter and those problems. We really want to contribute to solve them. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful country. I've been there, but in summertime when the pollution is
Indeed.
not so high. Arif, obviously Bangladesh is very famous for pioneering the concepts of microcredit and microfinance, etc. How do you hope that the principles can help the poor segments of society and maybe, you know, the average citizens in Bangladesh?
Yeah, thank you. As I already mentioned that in 4.5 decades, the poverty rate has reduced from 53 to 21%, and that is a great recognition, great contribution by the microfinance institutions. Many people say that Bangladesh is the Makkah of microfinance. The BRAC Bank, BRAC NGO, and the Grameen banks, Asha, they are actually doing a lot of good jobs. But I think that like our company, many of the bankers are now going to the small financing and affordable housing finance. But the real challenge is that when we signed yesterday, this responsible banking, I think it's a historic moment. But the question is that when you go back to our country and we say that we want to implement these things and we design our KPI and try to monitor every quarterly, annually that what is our target, and there is a cost to it.
What is the cost exactly?
Cost is that in certain cases profits will be less, and when the profit comes less, I'm the CEO of one company which is one of the top 25 company or listed company, and every shareholders in 90 days wants to see what is your profitability growth rate. And what this gentleman was telling that we all have short-term view in many parts of the world, and they say they want to see what is 90 days profit. And if we say that we want to take part in the responsible banking, means that we want to go for more green, more climate-friendly actions, more water treatment plant, more less carbon emission, more solar panels. That means you have to incur higher cost. So I think this is a historic moment where we need to go back to our country and talk to everybody that there is no choice for us. And that's why our country is one of the recipients of global warming, very highly affected country, and our Honorable Prime Minister is here to attend the Global Climate Action 2019 movement. And she is recipient of the Champions of the Earth award as well. So I'm sure the challenges will be there, but as many of the gentlemen saying here, that we don't have any choice. For our next generation, we have to implement these principles of responsible banking. And after global financial crisis, in many parts of the country, people do not actually trust the bankers. People think that bankers only take the benefit in different ways. So we need to show real commitment that we are part of the society. And I'm sure that this movement will one day, after a decade or 2 decades, will be a historic moment for all of us. And I personally want to take that challenge to convey this message to our countrymen that please be part of this movement.
And the bankers should now be trusted with the principles for responsible banking.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Konehali, Land Bank has, of course, been established in 1912 together with the government of South Africa. If we talk a little bit about political support and, you know, the Climate Action Summit happening here today and so on, how are you planning to further work with the government of South Africa? And do you get a lot of support, or maybe do you feel some resistance as well from some of the political parties in South Africa?
Well, the Land Bank is governed by an act which gives us the mandate that we have. And in the mandate, there's a number of objectives that we are supposed to advance. In the South African context, the agricultural development was skewed because of the history of the country. And so one of the objectives that we have is to promote inclusivity of previously disadvantaged and what we would now call emerging farmers into the agricultural sector. Secondly, ensuring food security, ensuring job improvement, and as well as agricultural entrepreneurship and so on. So there are all of these social objectives that we have, which as a bank, you would tend to default on only measuring financial affordability and only supporting those enterprises that seem to demonstrate that. So these principles for us will help us include within our own processes, within how we do business, some of the ways that will actually help us achieve all of these other social imperatives that we have. In terms of the support that we get from the government, I mean, I think it is important that by virtue of the mandate that we have from the government, the Land Bank is one of the ways that the government is trying to achieve some of the social change. But really it is also a partnership between public and private sector. We get a lot of our money and a lot of our funding from the private sector. So the Land Bank then becomes that catalyst, that three-way holder of getting money from the private sector, getting policy support and also financial support from the government in trying to just advance all of these social imperatives.
One aspect we have not really talked about yet is culture. Now, obviously, we have so many banks from so many countries, so many different cultural backgrounds. Dimitri, I'm asking myself, do you see any, major differences when it comes to the interpretation and the meaning of the principles for responsible banking that could pose a challenge, or do you think we can all align behind those?
Yes, Martina, you mentioned just a few minutes ago geopolitical situation. Well, the current geopolitical situation is dividing people, countries, businesses, and is creating international tensions. The principles call upon businesses to unite universal values and to ensure happiness and well-being of our children and future generations. We share those principles and those values regardless of country or culture. Well, obviously, we have to account for a specific country or organizational context, but the values are the same. So I don't think there is any difference in meaning or interpretation, though we will be starting like from different points, so we can tackle different tasks. Now, I've told we share universal values, but we also share universal problems, and I think that the banks have to be responsible for their responsible behavior, and they should take lessons from prior issues. Like, let's take a few examples, which I think were mentioned. U.S. mortgage crisis. Well, clearly the result of banks lowering risk standards and weak underwriting policy. All that was tolerated by the regulator. In emerging markets, like, I mean, I'm from Russia, we have that issue of foreign currency mortgages. We've experienced a few crises where our local currency ruble was devalued like significantly, and at the same time, the bank were used to provide foreign currency loans to people whose income is denominated in rubles. Well, clearly, during any crisis, it was almost impossible for people to service those debts, and we experienced a lot of mortgage crises in the past. Now, I guess we have to learn from those mistakes, and this is very important that there is an ongoing communication between the signatory banks, so that we can share our practices and we can and we report publicly to all of us about what's happening. Well, that's it basically.
So, of course, there are a lot of critiques out there as well that say that the principles will not really fundamentally change things, just in the same line as, the SDGs won't be achieved, and the Paris Climate Agreement will never see the day. What do you tell those critiques?
I say it's a journey. And the most important thing is that we have started on this journey. What the principles for responsible banking do is to provide a global framework by which all banks can work together to align their business strategy with the SDGs. And I think that is such an important first step. You know, if you reflect back on the financial crisis about 10 years ago, it was because there was a divergence between the goals of, you know, banks and many other organizations and society's goals. And the principles brings a convergence, there's alignment. And once you have alignment, you have a greater chance of achieving the objectives. And these are not just sort of airy-fairy ideas, you know, they're measures, clear impact area, there's going to be reporting, you know, to the society. So I certainly would encourage all the skeptics and the scorners to come on board and participate in a very constructive manner so that we can, all of us together, achieve the very ambitious Sustainable Development Goals.
Peter, you have a long experience in sustainable finance. If you can share some tips maybe on the front of, you know, innovation and making these principles work, what kind of advice would you have?
Well, I think one advice is that accept the skeptics, because we have a long way to go as banking industry to regain trust. There's only one level below us that are the politicians. And I also do think that banks have to change. Banking will always be there, but the way banks will be connected to the people more closer to the people, I think that's pretty important for the coming years, to find new ways, what you were saying as well, how to engage people more in our strategy development, in what we have to do. That will be the best remedy to regain trust. I think what will be very interesting for me in the coming years, how we look at impact, because this is famous triangle risk, return, impact, what is now the new sort of picture for banks, but impact is not a number. I keep saying that. Return and risk can sort of, in a certain way, can sort of go back to numbers, but impact is not a number. You need a much more holistic view. As we said earlier, some of us, it's not just climate, it's the social inclusion. If we don't include social inclusion, it won't work. People will not accept it. So this whole impact definition, how we do that, and maybe do more through storytelling and less of measuring things. I think that's a very, very important challenge, what we see for ourselves, and I think for the whole sector, to make steps into that. But if we do that, I'm quite sure that people feel banks much more closer, because we are not just a number. We are about human relations, we are about encouraging people to do new things. That should be much more at the forefront than just the numbers. So that would be my advice.
Ademola, before we come to the closing question for this panel already, unfortunately, how are you planning to make an impact with Wema Bank and the principles in Nigeria?
The journey really for us has already started. We've aligned our business strategy with the socio-economic agenda of the federal government, especially in the areas of sustainable banking and inclusive finance. We set up the first fully digital bank in Nigeria, and the whole idea is for financial inclusion and ease of access to finance. We've extended the digital bank now basically to address some verticals like agric, education, to address the ease of access to finance, and also to deal with those very difficult value chain areas to finance along the agri value chain. So really a lot of things are happening. Speaking to the internally, 20% of our branches have been converted to solar, and we've seen about 20% in operating expense. For setting up new branches, about 20% of the total capex is saved, because what we do is we outsource, to companies who provide these services. So it's quite, and in the area of youth empowerment, what we've done is Nigeria has a very, very huge population of the youth. What we've done is identifying the problem areas in society and also within the bank. And then we came up with what we call an hackathon, where they will come up, with solving those ideas, so those problems. And it's been quite successful. We moved into incubating those new ideas that came out of the hackathon. And we believe that with these, we'll be able to add value back to society in terms of being able to improve the economy.
That is something really important. I'm actually helping to establish an impact hub in Tanzania because I feel like the wealth gap is not just increasing with Africa, but the digital gap as well. So if we can build more impact hubs and that kind of infrastructure with hackathons and so on, that will be very, very useful. So maybe we can talk about this later. Fantastic. So I have one closing question to this whole panel. Again, in one sentence, the challenge that is to pave the way for the next CEO panel discussion, which will be on implementing the principles for responsible banking. So Keith, if I may ask you first of all, what is now the first step in one sentence to implement the principles for responsible banking for you?
Start measuring and reporting about what you want to change as a bank and engage with your people. I like to echo what Peter was saying. 93% of our staff is very much engaged now with the new purpose. Very important.
Keith?
Ditto, measure, and go.
Right. Please, Carsten.
Well, I hope and I believe that we can turn on the long light and that we can strike the right balance between the shareholders and the other stakeholders in society.
That's crucial. Key?
In our mindset, accept short-term losses or short-term investments for long-term results.
Perfectly said. Norihiko.
Analyze carefully what we should do and what we can do. And I'd like to set up realistic but steadfast targets and that we can achieve it and do it.
Arif.
Yeah, by changing the mind of our stakeholders that profits are long terms, not short terms, and in doing so, we will measure, we will record the impacts of in the KPI format and then measure periodically so that we can regularly monitor the performance of the achievement. Thank you.
Konehali.
In the bank, we work through people. And so I think also just getting the buy-in of our people into what the principles are trying to achieve so that they can then be the ambassadors and the people that actually do that on the ground.
Dimitri?
Yes, well, assessment and goal setting, and the goals should not only be desirable but feasible as well. And, well, because we are the only Russian bank joining so far, so involve others from our country.
Please get more on board. Sola.
Setting up an effective governance framework that will enable us to meet the commitments that we have made and ultimately drive sustainable growth.
Peter?
Engage actively with our stakeholders on this whole theme and make sure that in 10 years' time we do not have to add responsible anymore to banking.
Active engagement and using technology and innovation.
Thank you so much for this outstanding panel. Huge lineup, 11 panelists, but we made it. Thank you very much for your time.
See you later.